So, solo entrepreneurs, some of them do very well, but generally it's a team story. It's at least two co-founders who can be sounding boards. And generally I look for people who like hiring people around them as smart or smarter, and then enable them all to work together. So initially these companies are more flat and they're dynamic, and the folks in the companies are bouncing off each other, figuring things out, going back and forth, challenging each other.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
If you're an investor in biotech and medtech companies, two things should always be at the top of your mind: trends and team dynamics. According to Andrew Farquharson, companies must be hitting relevant trends that will drive innovation and return for investors. They also have to exhibit good team collaboration, chemistry, and commitment. As the managing director at Incube Ventures, Andrew spends most of his time investing in gene editing, cell therapy, biotech, and digital health. With decades of experience working in the life science sector and an especially optimistic attitude, Andrew shares valuable insights on building a successful team in the startup world. In this episode, we discuss the current trends and challenges in the life science arena, the importance of impact-driven work, and the need to strike a perfect balance between innovation and practicality. Here's our conversation. Well, welcome, Andrew. Thanks for joining me today.
Happy Friday. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I know. It's so nice to have you. I feel like I've known you for a long time. But this is a good opportunity for me to get to ask you a lot of questions that probably I don't know about you. So one of the things that I always like to start is a bit about your background story, your journey, what took you to where you are today, why the interest in healthcare, and what influenced you, who inspired you, that sort of thing.
Sure, there's a lot in there. All right. My journey, who inspires me. Okay. So I'll begin by saying that I'm an immigrant from Jamaica. As we were chatting separately, my journey here has been interesting because I came here when I was 10, and I didn't know what venture capital was. I didn't know about the biomedical entrepreneur scene at all in high school and not really in college. So my story really began at Berkeley. I went to Berkeley where I studied cell biology and Slavic languages. And after graduating from Cal, I went to work at Genentech on the research side. So I was in the research side of a very exciting biotech company. Genentech, as you probably know, is one of the first in the world. And that was an amazing exposure to me in how a world-class organization works. And while I was there, I was promoted up into management. So I also learned quite a bit about leadership. And that was fascinating. I was also there when Genentech was running, amazing to think about it now, but Genentech was actually running low on money. This is in the early 90s. And Roche showed up as a white knight. If you remember, Roche actually acquired the whole company for $2 billion. And then about 10 months later, took half the company public, raising $2 billion. And I thought, that's a fascinating hat trick. How does a capital structure play results in this impact in innovation? And it really made me think I got to learn more about business. And part of my journey is I'm always curious. I'm always curious about the fundamentals that drive any industry. And that thought process led me into getting an MBA. So I was at Genentech for a little under 5 years. I went off, I got an MBA at Harvard. And the Harvard experience was life-changing. I'm a West Coast guy. Harvard's in Boston, East Coast, different culture. I loved it. I loved the exposure to Boston. The exposure to all these MBA types. When I decided to go to Harvard, by the way, for an MBA, my Genentech colleagues thought I was strange for doing that because they thought, why would you get an MBA? But I wanted to learn about business. So I did that. And then out of business school, I helped build the company up back here in the Bay Area with a friend of mine, Nathan Hamilton, who went to Berkeley and Harvard with me. and the company was called Operon. So we built Operon up. Bob Saul was the primary founder, but Nathan and I took over the management, and we built that company up, and we had a very nice exit with it. That company made synthetic DNA. So that meant full-length synthetic genes and tiny DNA molecules called oligos. And we also pioneered the world's first whole genome microarrays for malaria and tuberculosis. And that was an incredible crucible of learning. I look back at how much I learned about business, and Harvard was amazing, and I met great people. But as far as actually learning the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, I'd say 90% came out of that experience. It was tough. It was stressful. We struggled to raise venture money. So it's an irony that I ended up in venture later. And we ended up getting 7 companies giving us term sheets to buy us, which I now realize is a really robust outcome of an M&A process. So we sold the company. I became an angel. I began investing in various folks, including my partner, Mir Imran, who you know.
Yeah.
And Mir and I co-founded Incube Ventures. Mir is a prolific entrepreneur in medical devices. And I've learned a lot from Mir. I think he's amazing. And that's a fast forward to where we are now. As an investor, I like investing in gene editing, cell therapy, biotech, also medtech, and digital health. I think is very interesting. It's a separate conversation about how I think about investing. But that's a long story short. I guess I will also say I only really learned about venture capital when I went to Harvard. I never really heard of venture at Berkeley or at Genentech.
That was different time, though.
Different time. That's very true. Now it's everywhere.
You just dated yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I think it's wasn't it somebody was saying like the 10% exposure, 20% reading or learning from others, 70% is by doing, and that's what you were saying about your. So now that you're an investor, you have the experience of being the operators. What are the certain characteristic or trend that you look at when you invest in a company? Because everybody always talk about team. What does that mean when investors say it's all about the team?
Yeah, well, there are 2 questions there. One is what are the trends that are interesting, and the other is what does all about team mean? And I'll take those things in sequence. I think as an investor, let me just, as a side note, say that some people say that if it's a really amazing company, the money is there. And I would say that's not always the case, because there are trends and there are sectors where investors generally earn more rewards. So I'm a life science guy. This is a life science podcast. But if you look at the broad industry of venture capital, AI is obviously a very hot space right now. That's a trend. And AI/ML, by the way, I think it's kind of embedded into how a lot of things are happening in biotech these days. It's not central to the thesis, but it's an enabling thesis, right? Computing power, smart computing power, especially around cell therapy, gene editing, and things like that. But in life science, I think the areas where I think investors get rewarded the most, it begins with biotech, right? You look at where the returns flow back to investors. It's a super high level. Biotech number 1, medtech number 2. Digital health is becoming very interesting. It's still too early to have a 2-decade, 3-decade story of returns. Digital health is clearly transforming the world. And then behind all that is diagnostics. And also, vaccines are their own special thing, but historically, diagnostics and vaccines have not been places where you're rewarded. So digging deeper into it, I think in biotech, CRISPR-enabled innovations are at the beginning of changing the world of medicine. We are just in the foothills, right? You think about Jennifer Doudna did with Emmanuel Charpentier and also Jill Banfield enabling it. That was 12 years ago. And before that, we didn't even do genetic circuit experiments, right? Now we're learning biology, and biology is complex. And we will need a lot of AI, by the way, to figure everything out. But it's all happening. So I feel like this is an incredibly exciting time to be playing in that area. And that's, you call it a trend. It's the beginning of just a mind-blowing explosion, I think, of innovation coming our way. So that's just kind of one obvious trend. Gene editing, cell therapy, those are hot areas. I think areas that are interesting, like neuromodulation, can do a lot for patients, but sometimes it's rewarded and sometimes it's not. Right, the public market side of that, the M&A side of that. The thing that really gets me excited, the two things that really get me excited. One thing is innovations that can change the arc of medicine. Once these innovations are unlocked, they never go back in the box. So we're changing the world. When I say we, I really mean the entrepreneurs, because people like me, we just enable it. We're not actually doing the change. But the second bit is these entrepreneurs. I'm working with a group right now out of Berkeley, and it's one of these things again where it's just an incredibly exciting, dynamic team. They're spinning out of academia, but I've done this long enough. I can see that they're gonna figure it out. They're going to deal with the downs. They're ups. They're gonna be downs, and there are things they're gonna have to solve technically that are tough. And they just seem to have the DNA as a group already to figure it out. So for me, the team is there chemistry among them? Is there chemistry with the opportunity? Is the opportunity big enough to be interesting for other investors to come in? And are these people who are totally transparent, not just with investors like me, but also with themselves? You're going to build a company. Brutal self-honesty is essential. Essential. And you have to, ideally, you do it with people who you love working with, who will challenge you. So, solo entrepreneurs, some of them do very well, but generally it's a team story. It's at least two co-founders who can be sounding boards. And generally I look for people who like hiring people around them as smart or smarter, and then enable them all to work together. So initially these companies are more flat and they're dynamic, and the folks in the companies are bouncing off each other, figuring things out, going back and forth, challenging each other.
And so how do you see your role as an investor at this stage?
All right. So
as you as a person also, not just investor in general.
I'll begin by saying I invest at different stages. All right. So in the broad world of venture capital, people like me are considered early. But for people who do nothing but early investing, I do some things that are around the company formation. This stealth company was not even a company until 2 weeks ago. I mean, it's that early. It's that early. And when I come in that early, I look for, first of all, this is fun. This is the most fun part, but the hardest part. I look for the science that is world-class and informed by the latest developments in the field, with people around it who are just on fire to change the world around where they think it's going to go. Just as an example, this is not specific to this one stealth company, but if you look at the field of CRISPR-enabled therapies, getting CRISPR systems that can work inside the body instead of outside the body. Right now, they're generally outside of the body and you put the cells back in. Making something work inside the body, that's a big vision. And to make it work, you really need to have systems that have very, very, very high specificity, very low off-target effects. And the FDA cares quite a bit about that. So there's an area there that is interesting. Metagenomi is a company I've been involved with that is solving part of that. And then another part of the problem is delivery. How do you deliver these systems in a way that doesn't just go to the liver? How do you get it targeted to tissues? And how do you do it in a way that's safe and you can do redosing and it can work in the body? And there are lots and lots and lots of issues in what I just said. But those are big problems, and there are exciting teams working on them. And some of them are tinkering around the edges, doing incremental things. And others are looking more fundamentally at where we can go. And as an investor, I think you have to think very carefully. What is a research project and what is actually ready for prime time? So a part of it also is, how financeable is it? How many other folks can we bring into the syndicate to help build the company? So part of what I do is I think about those things, financeability, future syndicate, capital requirements, IP. In the case of companies inside UC Berkeley specifically, I think a lot about, how do we set the company up outside of UC? Mainly because the tech transfer people are great, But any University of California innovation, as I'm sure you know, there's a tech transfer side of it, and it's just easier to form the company outside of it and build the company outside of it. There are many more things I can get into, but those are just things that, if it's a first-time entrepreneur, I help them think about all those normal things. When a company is later stage and they already have a syndicate and I'm joining the syndicate, usually it's because my partner or I, we bring something inside around regulatory or around reimbursement. Where are the risks? And by the way, reimbursement is a big one. And how do you get paid?
Right.
It's a whole side conversation, but digital health, diagnostics, med tech, biotech, the reimbursement outlooks are different in all these different situations.
And I feel like, so I do want to ask you about the reimbursement, but I want to go back to, so share with us, like, how do you find all these stealth projects?
Yes, that is literally.
And how to be found too.
Yeah. Well, part of it is, my balding head and my gray beard. I've been doing this long enough, right? It's a people business. And I really mean that. I'll say it again. This is a people business. It's relationships. And I don't run around looking for super early stage company formation, because that is really, as you know, it's a lot of work. I get a lot of inbound. And it's from people who worked with me and made money with me over the last, I've been doing this for over 20 years. And my passions are my passions. And I'm investing in people who I really enjoy, and they tell their friends and they tell their friends. I will say that if I'm going to find something very early, it's almost certainly going to be in the Bay Area, because that's where I live. And it's where I spend the time with these super early stage groups, especially in academia. I've invested in Boston. I'm in a company out of UPenn right now. I'm in a company out of Fred Hutch in Seattle. And those things come to me from relationships, other VCs, other entrepreneurs. But for the really early stage stuff, it's almost certainly going to be in the Bay Area from people who know me. And I live 3 miles north of Berkeley. So it's no surprise that I know a lot of people at Berkeley. Stanford, by the way, makes it so much easier to get companies off the ground. And so my partner Mir is down there and Talat's down there. So we see plenty of things out of Stanford as well. So there you go. Relationships and people.
Mm-hmm. So, and then close proximity to where the science begins helps.
Yeah, but also, I will say, just yesterday I was talking to another VC, and we were chatting about certain kinds of trends. And they're working in some things that I think aren't that interesting. And so there's a filter I have in my head where, if you're doing an incremental innovation around, let's say, AAV as a delivery solution in the CRISPR space, my interest just kind of dials down. I'm already thinking, what are the fundamental trends that are going to drive innovation and returns for investors, frankly, in the next 10, 20 years? That's kind of where my head is.
I think the nice thing about the Bay Area or the investor pool that we have is that every investor has different viewpoint, and then also horizon in terms of when they want to see the company become successful or they get their exit. Of course, everybody wants it early, but then, sometimes when you want to work on something that's changing the world, it takes a lot longer.
There's deep tech, which is a long, patient game. And then there's, for me, coming in later in companies that are already in the clinic. And those are deals where I expect a lower return. I expect more private equity multiple, but I also expect much lower risk. As a VC, I think as you build your portfolio, you've got to be mindful about balancing risk. So your own investors, your own LPs have a good shot at getting the returns they want. When you go super early, I think you just have to, the upside has to justify putting the risk around technology and clinic, but also time. Time is an ingredient that people often don't realize. It's an ingredient. It's an ingredient in a story.
And that's something that you cannot find more of.
Right. I wish,
yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group, Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So going back to what you're saying about reimbursement, I mean, there's a lot more talk about reimbursement now than ever, but it's always been. And why now is even more? Is it because that a lot of the exit have to happen, tend to be after commercialization? That's why the reimbursement become everybody's problem. Is that in the past you can just pass it along to like, well, I acquired a company and then the company got sold to another bigger company and then it's their problem. So that's why people don't talk about it so much. Do you think?
You know why they didn't historically and why they talk about it more now?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I would say you probably know this as well as I do. But I think the reimbursement question services in different ways depending on where you are in the industry. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, has certainly changed the outlook for small molecule-based innovation, for example. Bit of a side point. But, what drives exits? Generally, the investing that my group does, we look for pivotal outcomes that are dramatic improvements, and those dramatic improvements can often drive M&A without having to get commercial. I think you always have to be thoughtful about commercial, though, especially today. I think you have to plan for a company going all the way. And if you can't get paid in a way that drives a cash machine to build a large enterprise, it's hard to get other investors to invest. It's hard to build the business, right? This is why diagnostics has been tough historically to raise money for. The clinical trials are as expensive as in other industries like biotech, but the reimbursements are capped. They're much, much lower. So I mean, it's always been an issue. Now, I think aside from the IRA, one thing that I think is very much front and center, at least in my head, and you know more than me about this, but it's digital health. In digital health, digital therapeutics, what does it take to get an exit? Like we kind of know the model in some ways around, FDA-based pivotal trials, medtech, biotech. But in digital health, you often do need to get into the market and demonstrate that you're going to get paid, that the payers are willing to work with you because they're pioneering approaches that are new to payers.
Right.
And payers are not known for innovation, right?
No.
I think it's very interesting. And I feel like one of your podcasts recently, this gentleman out of Israel and New York, he had a very thoughtful approach to mental health. Getting paid in mental health can be very tough. But if you can actually help the clinician, then you get that stakeholder on board.
Right.
And then if you can get a way to actually capture the patient outcomes in a way that the payers can buy into, then you're getting something. But from the M&A side, you still want to see it proven in the market. So I think this is a long-winded way of answering. I think reimbursement digital health is front and center now because everyone's trying to understand really how those models will shake out. I think in the therapeutic world, it's more well understood. Biological molecules tend to do well on that front. In fact, I would argue that on the cell therapy and gene therapy side, getting $2 million of therapy. Other than the spectrum, I think there are issues there with access. There's a lot of issues.
Right.
I'm excited about innovations that will make those $2 million therapies maybe $500,000 or $250,000.
I think the challenge is also that I think with the technology, you cannot charge anything for $2 million. But when it comes to the drug therapeutic, $2 million, that seems to be okay. And there'll be people.
Okay, to a point, right? If you charge $2 million and patients aren't, driving $5 million to spend for hemophilia therapy, the math does seem to work. But the reality is, at $2 million of therapy, many countries just can't play that game. And I'm in this partly to change medicine for everyone. I do think the industry is going to solve it. I think that it's good we can start at these high-priced therapies, and the math does work in certain cases. I do think it's going to there will be some other major fundamental breakthroughs in the cell therapy and gene therapy space, though.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting time, like you're saying that the CRISPR, that's 12 years ago. And I think there's a lot of innovation as a result of that. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And the question is that as a society, who's going to pay for that?
That's right.
And
that's right.
Only the few fortunate and unfortunate, I guess, because unfortunate because you have the disease, but the fortunate because you can afford it.
That's right. Even if you can afford it, if you look at CAR T therapy right now and patients who qualify, it's a small subset that actually get the therapy. Because it's price, but it's also just availability. And these are bespoke precision medicine therapies that, there's a capacity issue of just being able to make a therapy out of someone's cells. How many people, how many companies can do that? But like I said, it's early days. And I think history will look back on this moment as the beginning of some very exciting stuff.
Yeah. So going back, and I'm talking a bit away from the science a little bit on when you're talking about this is a people business, you're looking for a certain team dynamic. Can you share us some example that you thought that you invest in the right people and then it turned out to be different from what you thought it would be? And then what do you learn from that? I'm just assuming that sometimes you make mistakes too.
Everyone makes mistakes. Yeah, there was a company that we were involved with. I'm trying to think how many details I should get into. The company had gone through raising a Series A and a Series B, and the entrepreneur wanted to bring in a professional CEO, and we actually recruited a CEO out of one of the big public medtech companies. Division president, great guy, by the way, great guy. Great on paper, but it turned out he just wasn't a good chemistry fit with the business, right? He really brought a big company mentality to it and expected kind of an entourage of people around him which wasn't appropriate for a company at that stage. And that was a red flag we should have probably reacted to sooner. Mm-hmm. And then on the fundraising front, he kind of thought it would just happen and took it for granted. So, I feel like hiring CEOs is super hard. Mm-hmm. And by the way, because of this, when it comes to founding teams, I often advise them to hold on to the reins until it's really obvious that either they're not the right people to run it or they are, right? Mm-hmm. So in this case, he wasn't communicating transparently around the financing. And kind of near the 11th hour, we realized the financing wasn't coming together the way it needed to. And frankly, we all thought it would because the company actually had good clinical data. And that company just died on the vine. It just died on the vine because, he wasn't the right fit. And the board didn't get full transparency on the financing. And that was tough. Mm-hmm. That was a good therapy, which just didn't make it. This is a while ago, and it turns out there have been other approaches that have solved it. So I feel like the market is ultimately getting to where it needs to get. But it is tough. And I think it's, no matter how good you are, when you bring a CEO into any situation, there's a bit of roll of the dice because no one knows the chemistry with the opportunity until they're in it. I think the one way to maybe mitigate it a bit is have someone join the board. But even then, they're not operating, right? So I think it's
mm-hmm. Do you think folks who tend to be like the leaders in a large company, oftentimes they got lured into the startup because that sounds like fun, but actually that's not. I mean, life is so different when you're a startup.
I think you're exactly right. I think they romanticize the startup life. Mm-hmm. And one thing I learned from that is I ask people, how comfortable in your gut are you really with risk? Because it looks like it's not risky, but it is. Everything in the startup world is risky. So, and I probe to see if people can be honest with themselves. But again, no matter how long I do this, I think hiring CEOs is just tough. Now, when you invest in a founding team, I've had a lot of good luck with that. there have been some teams who the science didn't work. Mm-hmm. That happens, right? And everyone's disappointed, but you go in knowing the risk you're taking there. Right. I've been pretty lucky with founding teams as far as that goes.
Mm-hmm. And do you think as a investors and the fact that you've done the operating, how much coaching and mentoring you provide to the founding team so that they can also grow along with the company?
It's such a good question, and it is so case specific.
Not everybody wants to grow with the company.
Well, some of the
Everybody
people
wants to.
are repeat winners, and they know what they're doing, and they don't need my mentoring or coaching. And that's great. Other times, there are companies where everyone involved is a first-time person, and I don't get involved unless they're open to coaching. It doesn't have to be my coaching, by the way. There are plenty of good coach. Part of my job is to bring good people around the company to help them figure things out. But there can be a lot of coaching when you're a first-timer, right? Some of these first-time entrepreneurs they haven't been trained in cap tables, P&Ls, what a Series A, Series B, Series C means, how you build a company, how investors think about getting returns, back on their money going in. This company Operon that I was a part of way back in the day, we didn't raise much venture capital equity money, and some companies shouldn't, and other companies need to raise lots of money. So for first time, young companies, I help them think through all those things. Like in cell therapy, the flag is this will take a lot more capital than you think. And in tools, it's often the reverse. Oftentimes I say, can you find a way to get prepayments from the pharma companies that'll help you capitalize the business, right? So I think it's all very specific, but I love coaching. I love mentoring. I love helping people grow. This is so much fun for me. I mean, I feel so lucky I get to meet exciting, brilliant people who are trying to change the world.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the fun part of the job.
That's
job, I bet. Yeah, because you got to see a lot of new ideas. It's almost like you're flipping catalog a lot of the time.
Yeah, so the investor asked me, how do I know it's going to be amazing? And I said, well, part of it is I just know. I mean, part of it is we get optimistic, right, Christine? Part of it is I do enough. I swim in the science enough that when someone comes in and it seems like they have an angle and I diligence it and it's really coming up positive, as an investor, you can get excited. I think you have to be an optimist.
Right. Well, you have to. And I think it also manifests too, because I think when you're optimistic, you figure a way out of it. And I think I think being entrepreneur takes certain personality, I think.
For sure.
Not for everyone. And I think it sounded, people only hear the fun story when they make it big. But I think you have to really love the journey.
I ask everyone that, and I warn them. I say, eyes wide open. This is going to be a journey where you are going to get challenged, and you are going to have ups and downs, often in the same day.
Yeah.
You have to be okay with that.
I know. I always say that entrepreneurs, you have to have a good mental health balance in a way, because you constantly straddle between, you have to be confident, yet you have to be humble. You have to be thinking short term, yet you have to think about long term. So there's always that polar opposite that you have to go back and forth. That can be
it's absolutely true. And you have to be comfortable with that. Things don't go quite the way. How do you figure it out? That's why it's great having a team, right? Having a team around you where you can help each other figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's oftentimes it's helpful to when you have the team that somebody you can trust, because otherwise you go crazy just thinking about it on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So last remark before, I know we are short of time here. If you have one advice for first-time entrepreneurs, what would that be?
Boy,
I know. I don't want to do 3 because I felt like, but if I went to do 1, then I know that's the one.
I'm pausing while I think about that because there's so many things to say to different kinds of founders. But I guess one thing I would say is, let me answer it this way. After you've done the introspection and the hard work to figure out that you're really committed to doing this, are you able to attract others around your vision, right? There is this line between passionate conviction and delusion. And if you can't get good people around your concept, that's a signal. That's on the negative side. On the positive side, what I would say is, and I've said this to a number of folks, actually, you go through all the kind of hard conversations. I say, okay, now that you're in this, it's 110% commitment. And you're going to just be in this with these people you love, and you're going to build something together. And remember that when the times get hard. Because inevitably, they're going to get hard. And grab your colleagues, grab your co-founders, grab the team, and just remember why you're doing it, right? That's what's driving all of us. I'm impact-driven. I think everyone doing the work in our field is impact-driven. Anyone in life science innovation, I think, is driven by trying to make the world a better place. Otherwise, why would we be in this?
Exactly. Yeah, well said. Thank you. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.